When the first Jewish man was elected President of the United States, at his inauguration, one of the reporters was there speaking with his mother. And she said to the mom, "You must be so proud of your son, all that he's accomplished. Oh my gosh, as a Jewish mother, you must be kvelling right now. You must be so just happy, filled with nachas. Today must be such a special day for you. It must be amazing to have a son like that." And the mother turns to the reporter and says, "Oh, you know David, the doctor?" It's an old joke. It's a silly joke. But there are lots of jokes along this line, right? It's become a trope, something that we see, a cultural meme in movies, television shows. The Jewish mother. And what is the Jewish mother more famous for than anything else? Guilt. And guilt is what I want to talk a bit about this morning. Guilt is, I think, an appropriate topic. We wish each other Shana Tova, a happy year. We wish each other a happy, a healthy, a sweet new year. But these days are days about guilt. We stand here together, we read the words from the Machzor, and we admit our mistakes. Avinu Malkeinu chatanu lefanecha. Our Father, our King, I've sinned before you. We list our iniquities, we list our mistakes, the things we've done wrong. We spend 10 days asking those we've wronged for forgiveness, trying to make amends. In all of this, we're admitting our guilt. We have sinned, we've done wrong, we seek mercy, we seek forgiveness. We are guilty. Guilt is the essence of this season, because without guilt, without feeling like you've done something wrong, you have no reason to do teshuvah. You have no reason to ask for forgiveness. You have no reason to say you're sorry. And that's what I want to talk about. I want to know how many of us really feel guilty. How many of us are truly sincere when we recite these words. I think our society is losing something important, a sense of guilt. The zeitgeist has spoken. The world at large tells us we should not feel guilty. We rationalize our behaviors. We externalize our actions. We blame others. Something caused us to act this way. Someone else is responsible. Society is responsible. Something out there, not in here. Sometimes we don't even admit we've done something wrong. As far as we're concerned, we're just doing our own thing, living our best life. That's the hashtag of society today. It's no wonder, if that's the culture and the world we live in, so many today connect and are enthusiastic with the food, but totally apathetic to the meaning of the holiday, the words of the liturgy. Modernity has done away with the sense of guilt. And it's not difficult to see how we've gotten here. Shame is another closely related emotional experience. And shame in our modern world has been recognized for what it really is. It's an emotion that is damaging. It's an emotion that doesn't have any positive impact. It is a negative feeling, not about an action one has done, but about oneself. And society is right that it's helped us to banish the idea of shame, to push it away. So when people feel shame for things that are beyond their control, things that they aren't responsible for, things like their physical characteristics, their sexuality, their ancestry, people are ashamed of something inside themselves. Sometimes it's an external source that tells them to feel that shame, but eventually it becomes internalized. People begin to underestimate their own value. That's what it means when you feel shame. You no longer see yourself as the very first teaching of our tradition, created B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God, as a reflection of sanctity and holiness, divinity. Shame lies to us. It calls to us from the depths of ourself and tells us we aren't an expression of God's divinity, we are worthless. It tells us that others will not value of us because we have no value. We shouldn't even value ourselves. It's a source of a myriad of mental health disorders like anxiety, depression, body dysmorphia, and more. Shame is not a good feeling. It is not a positive emotion. It has no beneficial use. In the Talmud, the essential text of rabbinic Judaism, the foundation of Jewish law, condemns causing another person shame. It recognizes that shame is not something we should want to feel, we should cause others to feel. In one story, Shmuel the Little is praised for taking the blame for something he didn't do, because it avoided causing someone else being shamed publicly. In another story, a man is saved from death, because he discreetly shared his bread with someone else, rather than publicly show that the person was needy. Jeffrey Rubenstein, professor of Jewish thought and rabbinic literature at NYU, he asserts that the Talmud's ethical uniqueness of all the traditions of its time actually lies in this fact. Other traditions say you should be kind to people. Other traditions say you shouldn't steal, you shouldn't murder, you shouldn't commit adultery. But the Talmud was unique in its time at the emphasis it took on shame, and that you should be very, very careful not to shame another. So Jewish ethics are clear. It is a positive feature of our world today that the zeitgeist, the society, that our culture is pushing against shame. It's a moral good that we're working towards eliminating its potency in our lives. But there's something else that's happening alongside that. There is a bug in the software. As we get rid of shame, as we update our collective emotional experience, we've gotten rid of guilt as well. The two are deeply related. They have many similarities, but they're different. Because guilt, though it might not feel good when you feel guilty, it has a beneficial impact. It has a purpose, it has a use that we should want. That's what this holiday is about. Shame tells us a part of us is flawed, a part of us is wrong. Guilt tells us we can do better. Guilt tells us that we made a mistake and we feel bad because tomorrow we know we can live up to a different potential, a better potential. Guilt tells us we did not live up to our full potential. It tells us not that we're bad people, not that we aren't worthy of connection or of joy, that we've made a mistake. And that's what Teshuvah is. That's what these holidays are about. We can't do Teshuvah. We cannot repent if we don't first admit we've done something wrong. If we don't feel a sense of guilt and that we can be better tomorrow than who we were today and who we were yesterday. It's the very first step to Teshuvah. It's admitting you've done something wrong. And if you don't feel guilty, you can't do Teshuvah. You can't grow. And in the rush to banish shame from our world, we've started to pull on another thread. A thread that if we continue to pull on it, it will tear apart the fabric of society. And that's guilt. My daughter's just over a year old. I get nostalgic when I go to toy stores or baby shops. And I'd see all the different things, some of them very, very similar, if not almost identical to toys I had when I was a child. And then I'm amazed sometimes when I see new toys that are very different, because the world we live in is different today. One of those toys that's changed very radically are the phones kids and babies now play with, the little toy phones. Right? They're not even like the flip phones that were back in the day. They look like an iPhone. They have icons and buttons and things you can press. But I saw one recently that didn't even have that. Didn't even have buttons to play music and to make lights light up. It was simply a mirror. It was like a selfie stick. That's the world that we live in. We teach kids that it's all about the self. Our society tells us it's all about ourselves. We've lost sight in this world that we share it with others. that we live our lives connected with others. We have a responsibility about how our actions impact and affect those around us, how our deeds affect others. There's a pandemic that's continuing to go on in our world, one that's not spoken about, one that's not in the news, at least not talked about in that way, but we can see it in the effects and in the stories that we read. A pandemic of toxic individualism. On the macro level, we can see this in all sorts of ways. Ironically, throughout the pandemic with COVID, we witnessed in a pandemic that taught us just how connected the world is, how much we rely on each other. We witnessed people caring only for themselves. Story after story. Now, there were good stories too. There were lighthearted, there were happy, heartwarming stories. But we saw selfishness. We saw people not caring at all about how their actions impact someone else, only about themselves, and feeling no guilt, no shame for acting that way. We see it in politicians who say one thing and do another, or those who seem to be proud of character flaws that used to make a person blush. We shouldn't feel shame for who we are, but we should feel guilt. We should feel guilty for acting badly, for doing badly when we could have done better. It's expressed on the micro level in a breakdown of our relationships. Co-workers, families, friends, communities, broken apart because people who make it up think only about their own interests, their own self. We've lost a sense of how our actions impact others. A recognition that our actions resonate beyond ourselves and we should feel a responsibility about how our actions affect somebody else. But again, as the hashtag goes, we're living our best life. That's what society tells us to do. The great libertarian philosopher John Stuart Mill put it, the only freedom which deserves the name is that of pursuing our own good in our own way, so as long as we don't attempt to deprive others of theirs or impede their efforts to obtain it. The simpler version of that is your right and your freedom to swing your fist ends at the next person's face. But that's what we've forgotten. Our rights, our freedoms, they do have a limit when it starts to impact somebody else. We've forgotten the second half of that idea, that we have a responsibility to others. And I pray that we can find it before it's too late in our world. I hope that as we read the words of the Machzor, as we think and we reflect on our actions of this past year, I hope that we feel guilty. We should. Because by feeling guilty, we know we can do better next year. We have something to strive for, something to aim for. Because I know we can be better. I know the world that we live in is not the world as it has to be. Our tradition tells us that. We should experience guilt. I want to end with a story from the Hasidic master, a story about Rav Zusha. He's an 18th century rabbi and tzaddik. And the story is told that on his deathbed, his students were gathered around him, trying to console him while he sobbed uncontrollably. He was crying and he was crying and he could not be consoled. They tried to comfort him and they asked, what is distressing you so much, our teacher? And he said, I've had a vision. I know what question God will ask me when I meet God in heaven. And the students immediately thought to themselves, to console him, they would say to him, what question could God possibly ask you that's upset you? You're a wonderful teacher. You are kind like Abraham. You're learned like Moses. You're a leader like King David. But none of that helped. Rav Zusha replied to them, God's not going to ask me why I wasn't more like Abraham or more like David or more like Moses. God will ask me, why wasn't I more like Zusha? Why wasn't I the best version of myself that I could be? And that's the important lesson of our tradition. We're judged not for being like others, not for being somebody who we aren't, That's where shame comes from. We wish we could change parts of ourselves that are innate. It's good that society's fought against that feeling. We should continue to fight against it. But Rav Zusha's emotion, that feeling, is an important one. It's a necessary one. The one which calls to us to be the best version of ourselves. It's a serious problem that we lose our sense of guilt in this world. People need guilt. Society needs guilt. I guess in essence, I'm saying we need more Jewish mothers. As we gather now for our prayers, I hope we can look towards this year to come and we can think about and mean the words in our Machzor when we say them. We can be better. We have done wrong. We are guilty. We're not bad. We're guilty. But it's a new year, and we can do better things. We can be better people. Shana Tova.